In 1995, Blockbuster Video controlled the entire home entertainment universe of America. In every town, every suburb, every strip mall across the country, there was a 9 in 10 chance you would find a Blockbuster, its blue and yellow sign glowing like a temple of Friday nights at their peak. They operated over 9,000 stores worldwide, employed 84,000 people, and generated $6 billion in annual revenue. They weren't just a video rental chain. They were the definition of how America watched movies. Then something changed. Not slowly, but catastrophically. And no one saw it coming. By 2010, the empire was ash. Thousands of stores had gone dark. 84,000 jobs had vanished. A company worth $5 billion had filed for bankruptcy, undone by a little red envelope and a password. This is the story of how total market dominance turned into total market blindness, and how the arrogance of size destroys even the strongest empires, not with a bang, but with a buffering screen. Welcome inside the world of Blockbuster Video, where the greatest entertainment empire ever built was dismantled, aisle by aisle, late fee by late fee, until nothing remained but an empty parking lot and a memory. Dallas, Texas, 1982. David Cook sat alone in a small office, staring at a stack of unpaid invoices. His oil field software company, the business he had poured everything into, was crumbling. The Texas oil boom was collapsing around him, and with it, the financial foundation he had spent years building. He wasn't broke yet, but he could feel it coming. And in that quiet, desperate moment, he started looking for a way out. Cook wasn't born into money or connections. He was a pragmatic, methodical man who understood systems, how things moved, how numbers worked, how industries operated. But the oil crash of the early 1980s didn't care about pragmatism. It was destroying companies far larger than his. Around him, other businessmen were selling assets, laying off employees, quietly disappearing. The market that had made Texas feel invincible had turned without warning, and ordinary ambition wasn't enough to survive it. What Cook had, what he had always had, was an obsession with data and efficiency. While running his software company, he had developed a deep understanding of inventory systems, customer tracking, and retail logistics. He could look at how a business moved product and immediately see where it was bleeding, where the waste was, where the opportunity hid. He spent months studying industries, reading reports, running numbers late into the night, not searching for passion, searching for a broken system he knew how to fix. Then his wife Sandy walked into a video rental store. It was a small, disorganized shop, the kind that existed everywhere in early 1980s America. Tapes stacked without logic. No real inventory system. Customers frustrated. Staff overwhelmed. The owner barely tracking what was rented, what was lost, what was profit. Cook walked in and saw something his wife didn't. He didn't see a video store. He saw a data problem with a retail face, and he already knew how to solve it. He spent weeks studying the home video industry, and the more he looked, the more it disturbed him. Every store was running on instinct. No chain had achieved real scale. No one had applied serious logistics or technology to what was becoming a massive consumer habit. Millions of Americans were renting movies every weekend, and the entire infrastructure serving them was amateur, scattered, and inefficient. Cook realized he wasn't looking at a saturated market. He was looking at an industry that hadn't been built yet in 1985. With his oil software business fading and everything uncertain, David Cook made a decision that people around him quietly questioned. He would not pivot into another tech contract. He would not play it safe. He took his capital, his systems knowledge, and his understanding of inventory logistics, and he walked directly into an industry that everyone else was treating like a hobby. He signed a lease in Dallas. He designed a store unlike anything the video rental world had ever seen. Massive selection, computerized inventory, organized layout, professional environment. He wasn't opening a video store. He was opening the future of video retail. On October 19, 1985, the first Blockbuster Video opened its doors in Dallas, Texas. By the end of that first night, the parking lot was full. The tapes were moving. The system was working exactly as he had designed it. David Cook stood inside the store he had built from collapse and calculation, and watched an empire take its first breath. 1987. Dallas, Texas. 2 years after opening, Blockbuster was already doing something no one expected. It was working. David Cook had proven the model, but scaling it required something he was running short on: capital. Then Wayne Huizinga walked into the picture. Huizinga wasn't a dreamer. He was a builder. He had already turned waste management into a billion-dollar operation through one simple philosophy: find a fragmented industry, systemize it, and scale it faster than anyone else can react. When he saw Blockbuster, he didn't see a video store. He saw that philosophy wearing a different uniform. He acquired a major stake and took control. Cook stepped back. Huizinga stepped forward. Huizinga rebuilt Blockbuster as a franchise machine. Standardized store layouts, centralized inventory systems, corporate training, brand consistency from Dallas to Detroit. Every store felt identical, and that was the point. Customers weren't just renting movies. They were trusting a system. The market responded immediately. Families who had avoided small, disorganized rental shops now had somewhere clean, reliable, and fully stocked. Weekend foot traffic exploded. Revenue per store climbed steadily. The model wasn't just viable, it was dominant. But the industry around them was a war zone. Thousands of independent rental shops were fighting for survival. Regional chains were expanding aggressively. Hollywood studios were suspicious of rental culture entirely, threatening pricing structures that could have strangled the business before it fully breathed. While competitors fought over existing customers, Huizinga targeted the customer nobody had yet: the suburban family who wanted convenience, selection, and trust. He wasn't stealing market share. He was creating new market. When early investors pushed for a cautious, slow expansion, Huizinga refused. He accelerated. One new store every 24 hours at peak expansion. Not growth, domination. But quietly, in university labs and tech offices across America, something was being discussed: digital delivery of entertainment. Compressed files. Connected households. Nobody in the Blockbuster boardroom took it seriously. The empire was rising faster than anyone had imagined. But speed, ambition, and dominance have a dangerous blind spot. They make you feel untouchable. And the most dangerous moment for any empire isn't when it's struggling. It's when it's winning. 1990. America's video rental industry was hemorrhaging. The explosive growth of the late 1980s had created too many stores, too fast. Thousands of independent rental shops that had opened on optimism alone were now closing on reality. Rents were high. Inventory costs were brutal. Customer loyalty was thin. Across the country, small chains and solo operators were filing for bankruptcy quietly, one by one, like lights going out on a long street. The industry that had felt invincible just 3 years earlier was fracturing at every seam. Most couldn't survive it. But Blockbuster could. Because while independents had been running on instinct, Blockbuster had been running on systems. Centralized purchasing kept costs lower. Franchise infrastructure kept standards consistent. Brand recognition kept customers walking through the door even when competitors nearby were shutting theirs. When the shakeout came, Blockbuster was the last man standing in nearly every market it touched. Huizinga moved immediately. As competitors collapsed, he didn't wait, he acquired. Shuttered stores became Blockbuster locations. Bankrupt regional chains sold their leases, their inventory, their customer lists for fractions of their value. Blockbuster absorbed them all, turning the industry's wreckage into its own foundation. What had once been a fragmented, chaotic market of thousands of independent operators was rapidly becoming something else entirely. One brand, one system, one dominant force controlling what America watched on Friday night. The consolidation wasn't gradual, it was a wave, and Blockbuster was riding it while everyone else drowned. By the early 1990s, Huizinga had transformed Blockbuster into the undisputed ruler of home video rental. No competitor operated at comparable scale. No chain could match its purchasing power, its selection, or its brand presence. Viacom acquired Blockbuster in 1994 for $8.4 billion, a transaction that announced to the entire entertainment world exactly how serious this empire had become. But the same year the deal closed, a small technology called the Internet was quietly entering American households. In California, engineers were already asking uncomfortable questions about what entertainment delivery could look like without a physical store, without a tape, without a late fee. Inside Blockbuster's boardrooms, nobody was asking those questions. To its credit, Blockbuster wasn't entirely blind to change. It experimented, music retail, entertainment merchandise, in-store gaming sections. It tried to expand the store experience beyond video, turning locations into full entertainment destinations. The instinct to evolve was there, but the execution was surface level. Cosmetic adaptation dressed up as strategic vision. International expansion became the new growth story. Blockbuster pushed aggressively into Europe, Australia, and Latin America, planting its blue and yellow signs in cities far from Dallas, exporting the American Friday night ritual to new continents. On paper, the numbers looked extraordinary. The empire was spreading. But spreading wide and spreading deep are two very different things. Blockbuster had survived the industry collapse that destroyed its competitors. It had consolidated power, absorbed the wreckage, and emerged stronger than anyone had predicted. Survival had become control. Control had become confidence. And confidence, unchecked, has a way of becoming something far more dangerous. 1999. The numbers that had defined Blockbuster's dominance were beginning to shift. The Viacom acquisition had loaded the company with crushing debt. Wall Street was losing patience. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, a company called Netflix had just mailed its first red envelope, a DVD, delivered directly to a customer's door, with no late fee, no driving, no empty shelf. The ground was moving. Blockbuster couldn't feel it yet. The debt from the $8.4 billion Viacom deal wasn't an abstraction, it was a daily weight. Interest payments consumed capital that should have been funding innovation. Executive decisions were increasingly made not around growth, but around managing financial pressure. The empire that had felt unstoppable in 1994 was, by the turn of the millennium, quietly bleeding from the inside. Then the market itself began to shift. DVD players entered American households at extraordinary speed, faster than VHS ever had. Customers began buying films instead of renting them. Retail giants like Walmart started selling DVDs at prices that undercut the entire rental value proposition. The casual Friday night customer, Blockbuster's most reliable revenue source, was slowly finding other options that in 2004. Under new CEO John Antioco, Blockbuster made a decision that was either visionary or desperate, depending on who was telling the story. It eliminated late fees entirely. Late fees had been generating nearly $800 million annually, roughly 16% of total revenue. Removing them was an attempt to win back customer goodwill, to compete directly with Netflix's frictionless model. It was a bold move that cost the company an enormous, immediate financial wound in exchange for a promise of future loyalty. Simultaneously, Blockbuster launched Blockbuster Online, its own DVD-by-mail service, designed to fight Netflix on its own ground. The strategy was clear: stop defending the store and start competing in the space where the customer was moving. Antioco refocused the entire organization around this dual model: physical stores plus digital delivery, legacy plus adaptation. For a brief moment, it actually worked. Blockbuster Total Access launched in 2007, and it was genuinely brilliant. Customers could order DVDs online and return them in-store, receiving immediate replacements. It combined the convenience of mail delivery with the speed of physical retail. Netflix had no equivalent answer. Subscriber numbers surged. For the first time in years, Blockbuster was winning a competitive battle. By late 2007, Blockbuster Online had accumulated nearly 3 million subscribers. Antioco's strategy was producing measurable results. Wall Street noticed. Industry analysts who had written the company off began revising their assessments. Inside the organization, there was genuine momentum, the feeling that the corner had been turned. Antioco pushed deeper, renegotiating studio contracts, streamlining store operations, and building the technological infrastructure required to compete in a digital-first market. The company was, for the first time, building systems designed for the future rather than defending structures built for the past. The foundation, though late, was being laid. Blockbuster had looked into the abyss and chosen to fight. It had absorbed financial pain, abandoned a billion-dollar revenue line, and built a product that was genuinely competing with the company threatening to replace it. Survival had found its strategy. The turnaround had a pulse. But empires are not destroyed only by competition. Sometimes, they are destroyed from within. 2004. America was consuming entertainment at a rate it never had before. Broadband internet was spreading. DVD players sat in nearly every living room. Disposable income was rising. And despite every internal pressure Blockbuster was managing, the fundamental market it operated in was expanding. More titles, more formats, more demand than at any point in the company's history. The entertainment economy was booming. And Blockbuster was still, for now, its most recognizable address. Americans were renting more than ever. The DVD format had reignited customer enthusiasm. Better picture, better sound, special features, lower production costs. Weekend rental volumes climbed. New release sections moved product faster than stores could stock them. Families who had drifted away during the VHS to DVD transition came back, drawn by selection and familiarity. Blockbuster's store count peaked at over 9,000 locations worldwide. At its height, the company served 47 million customers annually, but the landscape was crowding. Netflix was growing quietly and relentlessly. Redbox kiosks were appearing in grocery store lobbies, offering $1 rentals with zero overhead. Cable companies were piloting video-on-demand services that let customers order films without leaving their sofas. Each competitor operated on a fundamentally lower cost structure than a 9,000-store physical empire. The pressure wasn't dramatic yet, but it was structural. Blockbuster responded with Total Access, its most intelligent strategic move in years. The hybrid model of online ordering combined with in-store returns gave customers genuine flexibility that Netflix couldn't match. Marketing was aggressive. Messaging was sharp. For the first time in nearly a decade, Blockbuster was playing offense instead of defense. The store network, long seen as a cost burden, became a strategic weapon. Nearly 9,000 physical locations meant Blockbuster could offer same-day exchange, immediate access, and human service that no mail delivery competitor could replicate. The distribution footprint was unmatched. No rival had anything close to that physical presence at operational peak. Blockbuster was processing millions of rental transactions weekly. Inventory systems tracked hundreds of thousands of individual titles across thousands of locations. Logistics teams managed supply chains that would have impressed companies far outside the entertainment industry. The operational scale was genuinely extraordinary. The blue and yellow sign still meant something to American families. It meant selection. It meant reliability. It meant Friday night had a destination. Blockbuster's brand carried 2 decades of embedded cultural trust, the kind that competitors with better technology but no history simply could not purchase. In 2004, Blockbuster still controlled nearly 40% of the American home video rental market. No single competitor held more than a fraction of that share. The empire was under pressure, but it was still, undeniably, the empire. It was the largest, most recognizable, most deeply embedded entertainment retailer on earth. For one final moment, the golden age held its shape. The stores were full. The brand was strong. The system was working. And from the outside, Blockbuster still looked like exactly what it had always been: permanent, powerful, and impossible to replace. But golden ages do not end with explosions. They end with the quiet arrival of something smaller, cheaper, and devastatingly bettered. It started not in a boardroom, but in a moment of personal frustration. In 1997, Reed Hastings returned a VHS copy of Apollo 13 to his local video store. He was $40 late. He paid the fee, walked to his car, and sat with a thought that wouldn't leave him alone. Why does renting a movie have to feel like a punishment? Hastings began watching customer behavior more carefully. The late fee model wasn't just unpopular. It was creating genuine resentment. People were avoiding rentals entirely because of the anxiety attached to return deadlines. The friction wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was structural damage to the entire category. He saw not a complaint. He saw a door left open. When Hastings and co-founder Mark Randolph began developing the concept, the reaction from industry insiders was consistent: polite skepticism at best, open dismissal at worst. DVDs by mail seemed fragile, impractical, too niche. Why would customers wait days for a movie they could drive and get tonight? The idea looked small, inconsequential, easy to ignore. Netflix launched in 1998 as a simple parental DVD mail service. No subscription, no grand vision announced publicly. It was a test, a quiet experiment running in the background while Blockbuster's 9,000 stores handled what everyone assumed was the real business of movie rental. In 1999, everything changed internally. Netflix introduced the subscription model, one flat monthly fee, unlimited rentals, no due dates, no late fees. The design was clean. The proposition was simple. And the identity shift was total. This was no longer a rental service. This was a membership. Growth didn't walk in. It arrived at speed. Customers who had quietly resented Blockbuster's late fee system found Netflix and didn't look back. Word spread through households, offices, neighborhoods. By 2003, Netflix had 1 million subscribers. By 2005, that number had crossed 4 million. The red envelope became a recognizable symbol in American living rooms nationwide. Netflix wasn't just winning customers, it was rewiring behavior. The concept of planning your viewing week around a curated queue became a new domestic ritual. Film conversations shifted. People weren't asking what was at the store anymore. They were asking what was in the queue. The red envelope carried with it a feeling Blockbuster had never managed to create. Anticipation without anxiety. Netflix kept moving. Recommendation algorithms improved. The queue system became more sophisticated. Shipping centers expanded across the country, reducing delivery time to a single day in most markets. Each iteration made the product faster, smarter, and more deeply embedded in the customer's daily life. Blockbuster Total Access fought back hard in 2007 and briefly drew blood. But Netflix absorbed the pressure and continued evolving. Then in 2007, Netflix introduced streaming. No disc, no envelope, no waiting. Instant access to a growing library of content delivered directly to any screen in the house. It wasn't an upgrade to the existing product. It was the complete replacement of every physical format that had come before it. The aspirational version wasn't a premium tier. It was the future itself, and Netflix had already moved in. What began as a $40 late fee and a question asked in a parking lot had become the most disruptive force in entertainment history. Netflix wasn't just a competitor. It was a phenomenon, built on simplicity, designed around the customer, and engineered to make every existing model feel obsolete. And Blockbuster, the most powerful video empire ever constructed, had watched it happen from 9,000 locations it could no longer afford to keep open. 2007. The entertainment world was being rewired in real time. Smartphones were entering pockets. Broadband was reaching critical mass. The idea of walking to a physical location to select a physical object to watch a film was beginning to feel, not wrong exactly, but unnecessary. A generational shift in how people related to content was underway, and it was accelerating faster than any analyst had publicly predicted. The age of physical media was not ending. It had already ended. Most people just hadn't announced it yet. Customers were changing what they wanted without being asked. They wanted instant. They wanted personal. They wanted entertainment that arrived without friction, without scheduling, without a drive across town. The concept of browsing a store shelf felt increasingly analog in a world going rapidly digital. Blockbuster's core value proposition, selection, availability, physical presence, was quietly becoming irrelevant to the very customers it had spent 20 years serving. Netflix was streaming. Redbox was expanding to 20,000 kiosk locations at $1 per night. iTunes was selling digital rentals directly from Apple devices. Cable providers were deepening video-on-demand libraries. Amazon was circling the edges of digital content delivery. Every new competitor operated without leases, without inventory overhead, without 9,000 stores requiring staffing, maintenance, and electricity every single day. Inside Blockbuster's leadership structure, the dominant belief remained stubbornly consistent. The store was the brand, and the brand was the moat. Physical presence meant trust. Digital was a supplement, not a replacement. The executive culture that had been built on store count growth found it nearly impossible to imagine a world where stores were the problem rather than the solution. Old victories had calcified into assumptions. The data was not hidden. Rental transaction volumes were declining year over year. Late fee elimination had cost nearly $400 million without producing the loyalty recovery it promised. Store-level profitability was eroding in market after market. Customer surveys were consistently pointing toward convenience and digital access as primary demands. The signals were not subtle. They were being filed and forgotten. Streaming wasn't emerging anymore. It was arriving. Netflix's Watch Now feature, launched in 2007, was primitive by later standards. But customers didn't care about primitive. They cared about instant. Within months of launch, streaming hours were growing at rates that dwarfed DVD mail subscription growth. A new category had been born inside the living room, and Blockbuster had not built it in 2000. Reed Hastings had walked into Blockbuster's Dallas headquarters and offered to sell Netflix for $50 million. Blockbuster's leadership declined. The company that was generating billions annually saw no strategic value in a DVD mail startup with less than 1 million subscribers. It was not merely a missed acquisition. It was a declaration of which future Blockbuster believed in. Netflix crossed 10 million subscribers in 2009. Redbox processed its billionth rental the same year. Digital storefronts were expanding their content libraries monthly. While Blockbuster spent its energy managing debt obligations and defending store economics, its competitors were building the infrastructure of an entirely new entertainment ecosystem, faster, cheaper, and completely unburdened by physical real estate. The operational strain was becoming visible. Store closures accelerated. Franchise operators began exiting. The Total Access program, Blockbuster's most effective competitive weapon, was quietly scaled back after activist investors forced out CEO John Antioco, the one executive who had understood the threat clearly and built a credible response to it. His replacement reversed the strategy within months. The last real answer Blockbuster had was dismantled from the inside. Blockbuster didn't fall because Netflix was brilliant. It fell because every warning arrived clearly, repeatedly, and early enough to act on, and was met, each time, with the same response. Not yet. Not us. Not necessary. Decline is never sudden. It is a long series of ignored mornings. 2008. Blockbuster was no longer managing growth. It was managing survival. Debt had crossed $900 million. Store revenues were declining quarter after quarter. The stock price that had once traded above $30 had collapsed below $3. Lenders were watching. Investors were exiting. And inside the executive floors of Blockbuster's Dallas headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted from confidence to something quieter and far more dangerous. Controlled desperation. The store network, once the empire's greatest weapon, had become its heaviest anchor. 9,000 locations meant 9,000 leases, 9,000 utility bills, 9,000 staffing rosters requiring payroll every single week regardless of how many customers walked through the door. The physical infrastructure that had made Blockbuster untouchable in 1995 was, by 2008, consuming capital at a rate the business could no longer justify. The model hadn't been disrupted. It had been made obsolete by time, by technology, and by its own scale. Leadership made the call. Store closures would accelerate. Hundreds of locations were marked for shutdown. Franchise operators were released from obligations. The physical network that Wayne Huizinga had spent 2 decades building was being systematically dismantled, not as a strategic evolution, but as a financial emergency. 20 years of expansion reversed in 18 months. The replacement strategy was Blockbuster Online. Fully resourced now, aggressively marketed, positioned as the company's bridge to a digital future. Internally, it was presented with genuine conviction. This was the pivot. This was how a legacy brand would survive the streaming era. The logic was sound. The execution would not be. Blockbuster's digital infrastructure had been built reactively, not strategically. The technology stack was years behind Netflix's. Streaming capabilities were limited. The user experience was functional at best, clunky, slow, and visibly inferior to competitors who had been building digital platforms since the beginning. The foundation of the new strategy was structurally compromised before it launched. The organizational culture that had built a physical retail empire had no deep fluency in digital product development. Engineers were scarce. Digital talent pipelines didn't exist internally. Executives who understood store operations, franchise management, and physical logistics were now being asked to lead a technology transformation they had never trained for. The workforce was experienced. It was experienced in the wrong century. While Blockbuster was attempting its digital transition, the cost structure of its remaining stores continued hemorrhaging cash. Netflix was spending its capital on technology and content. Blockbuster was spending its capital on real estate. It was desperately trying to exit. Every dollar directed toward digital was competing against obligations from a physical empire still mid-collapse. Two strategies. One broken balance sheet. No room for error. The online platform underperformed consistently. Customer acquisition costs were high. Churn rates were damaging. The Total Access program, briefly brilliant under Antioco, had been defunded by new leadership before it could reach critical mass. Decisions that should have taken weeks were taking quarters. The organization was moving at the speed of a retail company in a market that rewarded the speed of a technology company. At BY 2009, the losses were no longer manageable through restructuring language. Blockbuster was burning through its remaining liquidity, trying to fund a digital transition while simultaneously unwinding a global retail operation. Every quarterly report revealed the same pattern. More stores closed, more debt restructured, more subscribers lost to Netflix, more market share transferred permanently to competitors who would never return it. The gamble wasn't failing. It had already failed. The strategy that had been presented as salvation had instead accelerated the timeline of collapse, consuming the last reserves of capital, credibility, and organizational energy that a genuine recovery would have required. Blockbuster had made its final bet, and the house had already won. 2009. Blockbuster finally committed to streaming. Netflix had been building its digital infrastructure for 2 years. Amazon was accelerating. Apple had normalized digital purchasing across an entire generation of consumers. And Blockbuster, carrying nearly $1 billion in debt, closing stores weekly, and hemorrhaging subscribers, was announcing its entry into a race that its competitors had already nearly finished. Timing in business is not everything. But arriving last to a war already won is not a strategy. It is a eulogy. Netflix had 12 million subscribers and a technology platform built specifically for streaming from the ground up. Its recommendation engine was sophisticated. Its user experience was clean. Its brand, in the digital space, was already synonymous with the category it had invented. Blockbuster's name carried 20 years of physical retail memory, late fees, empty shelves, fluorescent lighting. In the digital space, that history was not an asset. It was interference. The customer had already chosen. They had chosen quietly, decisively, and without looking back. Inside Blockbuster's operational structure, clarity had dissolved entirely. The remaining store network still demanded management attention and capital. The digital platform required investment and technical development. International operations were unwinding across multiple markets simultaneously. Legal obligations to landlords, franchise partners, and creditors created daily fires that consumed executive bandwidth that should have been directed at survival strategy. The organization was attempting everything. Executing nothing. In late 2009, Blockbuster by mail showed a brief subscriber uptick. Marketing interpreted it as momentum. Internally, the numbers were used to argue that the turnaround was beginning, that the brand still had customer resonance, that digital could be won, that the story was not over. It was the last false dawn before a permanent darkness. Redbox had driven rental price expectations to $1 per night. Netflix's monthly subscription cost less than a single Blockbuster late fee. The pricing architecture that had supported Blockbuster's revenue model for 2 decades had been structurally demolished by competitors operating on fundamentally different economics. Blockbuster could not match those prices without destroying its margins. It could not maintain its prices without losing its customers. There was no position left to hold. Store revenues fell 25% in 2009, then further in 2010. Each quarterly report confirmed the same irreversible trajectory. Markets that had once anchored the brand, suburban families, weekend renters, casual viewers, had migrated permanently to cheaper, faster, frictionless alternatives. The customer base was not shrinking. It was gone. Content licensing negotiations, once conducted from a position of enormous market leverage, now happened from weakness. Studios that had competed for Blockbuster's shelf space were now prioritizing Netflix deals, digital window agreements, and streaming partnerships. The supply chain that had stocked 9,000 stores with new releases every Tuesday was becoming increasingly irrelevant to how Hollywood distributed its product. Blockbuster was losing control of its own inventory. 3 CEOs in 4 years. Strategic reversals that undid previous strategic reversals. Key digital talent departed for competitors offering stability and vision. The board, under pressure from activist investors, had prioritized short-term cost-cutting over long-term transformation at precisely the moment transformation was the only option remaining. Every leadership decision in the final years solved yesterday's problem while accelerating tomorrow's collapse. By early 2010, Blockbuster's total debt exceeded $900 million against a business generating rapidly declining revenue. Credit facilities were exhausted. Refinancing options had closed. Vendors were tightening terms. The financial architecture of the company had no remaining flexibility. Every obligation was fixed, every revenue line was falling, and every week brought the cash position closer to zero. On September 23, 2010, Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing listed $1.02 billion in debt. Nearly 5,000 stores had already closed. The company that had served 47 million customers annually at its peak was asking a federal court for permission to restructure what remained of an empire that the market had already rendered irrelevant. There was no dramatic final moment. No single decision that broke everything. Only the accumulated weight of 1,000 ignored mornings finally touching the ground. The blue and yellow signs came down quietly, city by city, suburb by suburb. Each empty storefront a monument to the distance between dominance and adaptation, between legacy and relevance, between an empire that had conquered its era and a future it had refused to see coming. Blockbuster had not been destroyed by Netflix. It had been destroyed by the certainty that it couldn't be. Bend, Oregon, 2024. There is one Blockbuster video store still open in the entire world. It sits in a strip mall on the edge of town, unremarkable from the outside, familiar from memory. The sign still glows. The shelves still hold cases. A small staff still shows up every morning and unlocks the door. But it is not a business anymore. It is a monument. Across America, the rest of the empire is gone completely. Where 9,000 stores once anchored strip malls from Florida to Alaska, there are now nail salons, insurance offices, and empty storefronts with sun-bleached outlines where blue and yellow signage once hung. Parking lots that once filled every Friday evening sit silent. The drop-box slots have been sealed or removed. The carpet, the fluorescent lighting, the new release wall, all of it erased, as if it never existed at all. But it did exist. At its peak, Blockbuster employed 84,000 people. It served 47 million customers annually. It generated $6 billion in revenue from a simple proposition. Drive to the store, choose a film, go home, watch it together. For 20 years, that proposition was not just a business model. It was a cultural ritual, a Friday night religion practiced in every suburb in America that IT fell for reasons that were visible long before the end. A $50 million acquisition offer from Netflix, rejected. Late fee revenue prioritized over customer loyalty. Total Access, its most effective competitive weapon, abandoned under investor pressure. 3 CEOs in 4 years. A digital transition funded on borrowed capital, executed too late, and built on infrastructure that was years behind competitors who had been building since the beginning. Blockbuster did not fail for lack of resources. It failed for lack of belief that failure was possible. Netflix today serves over 260 million subscribers across 190 countries. It produces original films and television that compete at the highest levels of global entertainment. Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, and Apple TV Plus have collectively restructured how the entire world consumes content. Each of them built what Blockbuster was offered the chance to build, and declined. The executives who made the defining decisions were not incompetent. They were successful, deeply, demonstrably successful within the model they had mastered. That was precisely the problem. The skills that build empires are not always the skills that sustain them. Leadership that understood physical retail, franchise scaling, and store count growth found itself navigating a technology transformation it had never trained for and never fully believed was necessary. Success had narrowed their vision at exactly the moment the world demanded peripheral sight. The Blockbuster name still exists. It is licensed, referenced, nostalgically celebrated. The bin store sells merchandise, t-shirts, tote bags, candles that smell like old VHS tape and memory. A Netflix documentary was made about its final days. People visit like tourists visiting a historical site. The name survives. The power, the vision, the empire it once represented, those are gone entirely. What remains is a logo attached to a feeling, commercially maintained long after the substance beneath it disappeared. That last store in Bend is not really a video store. It is a question left open in a strip mall, asking every business, every leader, every institution that walks past it the same thing, quietly and persistently. What are you refusing to see right now? No market position is permanent. No brand loyalty survives irrelevance. No empire, regardless of its scale, its history, or its cultural embeddedness, is protected from the consequences of choosing comfort over adaptation. The companies that survive generational shifts are not always the smartest or the best resourced. They are the ones willing to dismantle what is working before the market dismantles it for them. Blockbuster had the capital. It had the brand. It had the customers, the infrastructure, the cultural presence, and, at least once, the direct opportunity to acquire the very company that would destroy it. It had everything required to survive. Everything, except the willingness to believe that what had built the empire would not be enough to save it. The last store closes at 9 p.m. The sign goes dark, and somewhere, a Netflix server quietly streams on.